I just want to say at this point, if there's anybody listening who's being triggered by these stories, can you please potentially, if you're not able to kind of handle it, or you're getting really triggered, can you please go and have a little chat to someone who you feel is safe at this point, because we're discussing some pretty serious stuff here. So if you can't find anybody to speak to, there are plenty of helplines that you can ring up and speak to as well. So don't feel like you're alone, but it's just really important that I just stop this at the moment and just give that message out there, because sometimes I can't hear this stuff and it'll trigger me into my stuff. So I'll go and speak to somebody. So if that's happening for you at the moment, please have some self-care and some love, and just take a bit of time out for yourself. And
please do that, and not stay. Don't stay just because you think you're going to miss something. This video will be here. It can be paused. You can take a breath, get some fresh air, or do what Alyse is describing too, just to keep yourself in a good space.
Yeah, so sorry, Nat. I just wanted to add that in there. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's totally fine.
Good to remember that.
So my ex's family, there is actually parental alienation in there, because him and his mother and father divorced, and I don't know exactly what she said, or did, but he was never very open with me about his childhood, but she did used to try and make the kids feel guilty for going to see their father, and then when they come back from seeing him, she'd question them about the new partner, and is she thinner than me, is she younger than me, or blah, blah, like just very inappropriate behavior from her. And I think, sorry?
I'm sorry, lots of judgment.
Yes, yep. So, and it led to them, I think, perhaps that they certainly didn't have a very good relationship with their dad, and they still on and off don't. But in his family, I know he was, and I don't know exactly who the perpetrator was, but it was either aunties, uncles, or cousins. He was molested as a child. His grandfather was kind of the ringleader of it all, and actually molested his mother. So she was molested as a child by her dad. He ended up in the prison where pedophiles are sent in Victoria. He did time there. And when my ex and his younger sister tried to tell their mother that they had been abused, her reaction was, "You're not stopping me from seeing my family." That was her response. And when we'd go over there for dinner, myself and my ex, she'd get photos out of the abusers, or she'd say, "So-and-so would love to catch up with you guys. Why don't you go over there and have a barbecue with them?" And then I'd ask, "Is that the people that molested you?" And he said, "Yes." So I'd say, "Why don't you tell your mum to stop, you don't want to talk about it?" And he just never did anything. He just let her bring those people up. And we also saw on Facebook his mother having social contact with these people. Like, there were pictures on Facebook with the people that molested him and his sister. So she still has ongoing contact with them, even though she was possibly molested by them as well, and she knows that they molested her children.
Yeah. This is a big problem. I see this in my practice. I have a few people with DID who come in, and this story, what you've just said there, Natalie, is very much a reflection of what they say as well, that they're not heard within the family either if they speak up, and they're accused of making it up and lying, and then they all still continue to protect the perpetrators. And it's very secretive, and it does go on in families, and it creates huge mental health challenges for those who are exposed to it. And your ex is definitely really would benefit from stepping into getting some help, because this intergenerational stuff doesn't change unless we stand in our stuff and do the work. And it's really hard to do the work, and I completely commend you, Natalie, for standing outside the enmeshment, even away from what's happening with your mum, because to keep going back in, you can't change the patterns, the intergenerational patterns. And it sounds like your ex, that's exactly what he's doing. He's completely caught up in it with no voice, no power, no credibility, and he's going to be carrying this secret for gosh knows how long. So it's just a whole world of pain. And the sexual abuse stuff, this is what people need to understand. It might not just be a stranger down the road. It could be actually going on with a few family members in the home. So at family gatherings, like it's really, really weird. It's really full on. And
sorry.
Yeah. No, please.
Gatherings, he would never fully explain what happened to him or what he saw, but he also told me at family gatherings they would have like group sex, and him and his cousins watched it, and they played. How old
was he?
Oh, I'm gonna say 6, 7, 8 years old. And he said that they used to play pornography and the kids watched that as well. And apparently, I believe his parents might have been involved in the group, the group activities.
So imagine if you'd had a child in that family, Nat.
Oh my God, I'm so glad. I'm so glad I did not have a child with him.
Wow.
And he was working very hard on making me feel guilty about that.
Can you talk to us a little bit about that? Because we know like that's another really interesting angle as well, when you don't want to have a child because you've grown up in this particular atmosphere and you really want to kind of work on yourself and not particularly pass on the genes, and then you have a partner come in who's really putting the pressure on you to have a child. What's that space like, Nat?
It was horrible. I used to get so frustrated because I clearly remember telling him, and my friends back me up, because I've got, friends. I've got a friend who's known me since I was 5, and the other friends I've met in year 7, and we're in a sort of group, one of the groups of friends I have, and they all say, I remember you as a child saying you didn't want children. Like, everyone knows that Natalie doesn't want children. So when I met him, of course, I said that's not something that I want. And I remember being at a party and I met some of his friends there, and there was another girl who I got along well with, and I remember her saying, oh, wow, I know I'm going to get along really well with Natalie. She doesn't want children either. I'm really glad to meet someone who also doesn't want children. So, from the get-go, as soon as I met him and met his friends, everybody knew, well, Natalie doesn't want children, so that couple isn't going to be having children. And then I suppose you could call it gaslighting, but he'd constantly bring it up, even though he knew that I didn't want to have them. And instead of my choice being neutral, like it's just my choice, he'd just say, you're a negative person. How come you hate children so much? We'd also go to people's houses with children, and he'd never directly bring it up, but we'd always end up in a fight when we got home. And me being, I suppose, working in mental health and quite intuitive as well, separate to working in mental health, I knew that he was starting those fights because we'd been around children, and he knows that I don't want them. But a lot of, I suppose I'd call it subliminal messaging. I'd always get, you're negative, you're somehow defective for not wanting children. And I'd confront him and go, well, you don't need to be with me. You can be with someone else who wants children. Like, I'm not keeping you here. And then he'd fluctuate and say, oh, it's just you and I, that's fine. I love you and that's all that I need. So he'd back down and say that, and we'd be in a good pattern for a while. And then he'd go back to the wanting children, and you're a negative, horrible person for not wanting children. But I now realise that's because he's also a narcissist, and that was him devaluing me after the love bombing stage. So that was one way to get to me. It was definitely a sensitive point.
And keeping you there as well. It would keep,
yeah.
You would be in his world forever at that point.
Well, when I actually gave in and said I might have a child, he upped the number and said, no, I want two. So he'd always move the goalpost. And then he also said, I don't want a child with you to be horrible anyway, and you'd be a horrible mother. That's also what he said. So when I did give in and say maybe we could have one child, because I was that, like, I compromised my own values because of this person. Like, I really deep down, I don't want a child, but I was considering having one. And when I finally came to that agreement with him, it wasn't good enough anyway. So now I'm not in that relationship. I can see what he was doing. But at the time, I couldn't see that.
Yeah.
That's the hard part, being the one inside. You know, it's so close, you can't see it. It's hard to recognize it when you're so close.
Yeah. So I'm just going to, is there anything else around that relationship that you'd like to add before we sort of move to a different set of sort of line of questions?
I think that my, like, looking back now, my ex, from the parental alienation and also just being brought up in that environment and the childhood sexual abuse has actually, I don't know if he would have turned out to be narcissistic himself if that didn't happen. And also the impact on him was that while we were still together, he had a psychotic episode, and I actually had to call the CAT team that I used to work for to treat him. So I no longer pick up casual shifts there because I just feel almost, not that I should feel embarrassed, but yeah. So, sorry?
It was too personal. They know
definitely. And I didn't know, but he lost his job and he was at home smoking a lot of marijuana, and I didn't know that. And that's what caused him to sort of tip over into psychosis. And I feel like, you know, I might be judged on that. Is Natalie a substance user and all of this kind of stuff? And I was actually working 2 jobs to try and support us. So, yeah.
This is very difficult when mental health workers have somebody that they're related, like closely related to a family member or something like that. What's that space like for you as a professional? How does it impact your work? And yeah.
I find it really difficult because in the area I work in, so public mental health, I don't feel like I can say I have lived experience. It's kind of not, I've noticed in areas that are not for profit or not as medicalised maybe, that people are allowed to say, I'm a professional, but I also have lived experience, but we're sort of not allowed to say that.
Yeah,
I'd agree. Very frowned upon. So people often say, wow, you're so good with the patients, especially the personality disordered ones. And yeah, I can't really say why I'm so good at dealing with them. People that know me well know about my mum and my ex, but, you know, it wouldn't be appropriate if I sort of ever let the patients know, and I definitely wouldn't. But the broader teams that I work on, it certainly wouldn't be looked at in a positive light if I said, I'm Natalie, I'm a mental health nurse and I'm a survivor of this, and also I've had family members that have had psychosis. So yeah, that's hard. So it's like a double-edged sword. Like, it makes me possibly better at being a mental health nurse, but at the same time, I guess it can be very triggering too, especially when I was working on the CAT team. The pointy end crisis work, I think working on that team really brought up a lot of my own stuff as well.
Yeah, okay,
but I don't work for them anymore, and I've actually worked with older people over 65, and
Okay.
I feel that that age group is less triggering for me. When I've worked with youth, I found that highly triggering, extremely triggering to work in, so I left there. But yeah, I think the aged age group is a lot less triggering, so since I've been there, I don't feel as triggered.
I can see that as a guardian ad litem. So I don't have the mental health experience, but I am a guardian ad litem. And when I'm working with children, I feel like I have more insight or more compassion for what the children are going through than the people that are making them go through it. And it's sad that they don't see that or understand it in the dependency areas anyway. And it is hard. It's really hard to watch that sometimes, because you can't say, well, I know how you feel, because one,
No.
and two, you don't want to bring that in, and it's supposed to be very anonymous, and it's always supposed to be about the children and not,
Yes.
But,
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, it's kind of similar, maybe a little bit difficult still.
So just going back to the mental health system, Nat, because I work in mental health too, as you know, and I'm in the hospital system a lot and in private practice and at uni and stuff. So what are you seeing in the hospital system that you'd like to see changed, and what's good about the hospital system for mental health in the public system, I might add?
Yeah. I'd like to see, in terms of, especially, so we see a lot of people that definitely have narcissistic traits, but usually their diagnosis is depression or anxiety or something else. But we definitely see people with a borderline personality diagnosis. And I really feel that the public mental health system isn't set up to treat people with borderline personality disorder, and if anything, they often sort of just say, oh, brief contact with clients with borderline, and they just have a short admission, like a short crisis admission, and then we kick them back out so they don't become dependent on the system. And I really think that that's feeding into all of that abandonment stuff underneath. There's also not enough time to give these people that are so complex, so that also feeds into the whole abandonment issue that they have underlying. So I wish there was actually services that were more appropriate for them within the public system. I know in private, if they have enough money, they can access some really good supports, but for the clients with borderline personality or even, quite severe trauma, if they don't have the funds, they can't access that. So they end up in our system, and it's really just putting out spot fires and hospitalising people for short periods, and not that ongoing therapeutic work that they need. What's positive about it was the other question. I suppose there are a lot of people like myself that do, although the system's not set up for it, if that's an area of interest for you, and I don't think you can work in mental health without acknowledging that trauma underlies a lot of it. There are a lot of people that we do work that way anyway, and it's just about trying to find the right services to link your clients to, because I don't know if you're aware, but I work in the community. So if we can't if we're not the correct service for you, we will try and find something that is more a better fit. And I know, because I myself do EMDR and I find that it works for me, I sort of try and steer people towards not necessarily EMDR, but therapy that's there to address the trauma. But the next issue with that is people have to be ready to address it. So,
That's the key, isn't it? People have to be ready to address it. They need to be ready to step into the space. And having said that, I would recommend that anyone who wants to step into the space and they feel like it's time to actually go down and get some therapy and share your story and learn how to have a voice and start some of the healing, that you don't necessarily just have to run with the first therapist that you're given. You can actually go in and do your research, ring them up, talk to them, find out what they specialize in, find out what their experience is, see what sort of personality type they are, whether you're a good fit or not, because all of this goes a long way to your therapy being a success. So, and a lot of the time there's such a big power imbalance between the therapist and the person coming in, and it doesn't necessarily need to be like that. You do have power around who you see and who you choose, etc., etc. So I just wanted to just mention that about.
So I want to ask you a question about that. When, you know, because we've been talking about this quite a bit lately, and when someone goes to see someone, can you talk about that it's important to have a good connection with the person that they hire and what they can do, and that it's okay if they choose to leave?
Yes, yeah. If they choose to what, sorry?
If they choose to leave and that they need to find a new therapist, or, you know, that it's okay to more or less.
It's absolutely okay. Yeah, it's absolutely okay. If you're not getting along with the therapist, or the therapy isn't going the way that you want it to, or look, no, that's probably not the right expression. If you don't feel like you're getting value for money, you're not feeling heard, you're just not kind of moving in any way, you can change therapists. And there's a lot of different modalities that can be brought into the room as well, and you need to find a good fit for you. So some of them, psychodynamic psychotherapy is really powerful. Emotionally focused therapy is really powerful, combined with cognitive behavior therapy. Somebody who's got a really good handle on developmental like child developmental areas, that's really, really important, so that they understand how the brain might have changed when you were young. And as Nat said, the EMDR therapy is also being used with attachment focused, what EMDR as well, light sort of shining on that. So there's a lot of different paths that you can go down, and yeah, and it's about finding the one that's right for you, and that's part of my research, is trying to find treatments in this space that work really well for alienation, because it is a very different sort of space. So yeah, but on that note, we possibly should end the session. So I just wanted to hand it over to you, Nat and Dawn. Is there anything else that you girls would like to add before we finish?
I guess I just wanted to say I hope that, you know, that was helpful for you guys in your research, your project, and I hope that if anyone's listening, that if they identify with my story, I hope they find it helpful.
Yeah, and I just want to thank you, Nat, for sharing this story. And, you know, it's not always easy to come and share stories. And like we were just talking about, even when you're looking for therapists, you're really having to share a lot of this, you know, information. And it takes a lot of courage. So I appreciate you coming and sharing and being willing to, you know, help others that maybe can relate to you. So thank you again for coming.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Thank you so much, Natalie. Okay, talk to you on the other side.
Okay, bye. Thanks.
Okay, bye.
Bye.